The whisper that survived time. What if one of the most brilliant minds in human history left behind a secret he was too afraid to share until the very end? In 1954, a year before his death, Albert Einstein allegedly gave a final interview. It was never broadcast, never published. Officially, it never happened. But in 2022, hidden in the double bottom of a rusted safe in Princeton, a forgotten transcript surfaced. It bore one haunting line on its cover. These confessions may change humanity or destroy it. This wasn't a scientific paper. It wasn't theory. It was a confession of what Einstein believed happens after we die. He spoke not as a physicist, but as a man staring into the unknown, with clarity sharpened by the nearness of death. The interviewer asked just one question to begin. "Do you believe in life after death?" And Einstein replied after a long pause, "To believe is not the right word. At my age, I prefer to know." What followed challenges everything we think we understand about time, consciousness, and the illusion we call death. This interview was never meant to be heard, and yet somehow it found its way to you. So take a breath, let go of certainty, because what you're about to hear isn't about dying. It's about what refuses to die. Part 1. The return to the ocean. Consciousness beyond death. To believe is not the right word, Einstein began softly. At my age, I prefer to know. The room fell into silence, save for the low crackling of the fire and the wind rattling the window panes. The journalist blinked, not expecting such a direct, almost defiant reply. He cleared his throat and continued, trying to remain composed. But science, your science, has always denied the soul, denied the continuation of consciousness. Einstein leaned forward, hands clasped. His eyes sparkled with something between fatigue and profound certainty. "Not my science," he said. "Science, as the masses know it, is a narrow tool, a hammer that only sees nails. It reduces reality to what can be measured, isolated, repeated in laboratories. But life isn't confined to equations." He paused, then added in a hushed tone, "What I am about to share must remain in silence, at least until humanity is ready. Life does not end with death. This is not a theory. It is a pattern I discovered through the mathematical structures of time and space." The journalist scribbled furiously, his hands trembling slightly. "Are you speaking of the soul, Professor? Heaven?" Einstein shook his head, smiling faintly. He raised his hand, curling his fingers into a soft arc. "Picture a wave," he said. "A wave on the ocean's surface. It rises, forms, moves. As long as there is wind, it dances, but when the wind stops, the wave vanishes, or so it seems." He tapped his temple. "The water remains. The energy of the wave has not ceased. It has simply returned to the ocean. Human consciousness is that wave. The body, a vessel. When the body dies, the wave does not vanish. It returns to its source." The journalist stared at the old man in front of him, heart pounding. This wasn't poetic metaphor. Einstein's voice held the same clarity and confidence as when discussing the curvature of space or the bending of light. "But how does this idea align with the theory of relativity?" the journalist asked. Einstein chuckled lightly. "Relativity describes the behavior of matter and energy, but it is incomplete. It lacks the most essential factor of all, the observer. The one who watches the apple fall, the one who thinks about falling. Consciousness," he continued. "Consciousness is not created by the brain. That's an illusion, one science has clung to for too long. The brain is a receiver, like a radio. It tunes into certain frequencies, channels perception. But the signal, the source, comes from beyond time and space." The journalist looked up stunned. "You mean consciousness is not local?" Einstein nodded. "Precisely, non-local, not limited to the body. The body dies, the antenna breaks, but the signal continues. Like radio waves that keep pulsing through space, long after the receiver is shattered." There was a long pause. "Professor, is that why you've remained silent all these years?" Einstein's face turned solemn. "Yes, Not because I feared ridicule, though that would surely have followed, but because mankind wasn't ready. You see, if this truth is misunderstood, it can be weaponized, to control, to manipulate, to promise salvation in exchange for obedience. He sighed, but silence has its dangers too, and now, as I near the threshold of death, I believe the time has come to speak. But, the journalist asked cautiously, isn't this metaphysical, isn't it faith? Einstein's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with intensity. No, this is not faith, this is pattern recognition. My work on the unified field theory led me to see a structure, an elegant geometry, connecting matter, energy, and consciousness. Most physicists stop at particles. I followed the vibration behind them, and behind the vibration, I found silence. And within that silence, awareness. The journalist said nothing. The fire popped. Einstein continued. You've heard of the EPR paradox, yes? Entangled particles. Two quantum bits, separated by distance, still responding as one. Connection, not in space, but through space. Now tell me, if particles can remain connected across light years, why not consciousness across death? There was a chill in the room. The journalist didn't write, he simply listened. The fundamental illusion of our world, Einstein said, is that we are separate. Separate from one another, separate from the divine, separate from the dead. But all of that, space, distance, identity, its scaffolding, temporary forms. His voice lowered. The truth? Consciousness shapes reality, not the other way around. And when the body dissolves, consciousness doesn't die. It returns, not to nothingness, but to wholeness. The journalist finally spoke. Then, you believe death is a return? Einstein smiled wistfully. Yes, not an end, not even a beginning. A return to the ocean, and perhaps a choice to rise again, to become another wave. Part 2. The structure beyond the atom, matter, mind, and the unified field. The fire in the study had burned lower now, its glow flickering gently across the faces of both men. Outside, the wind had quieted, as if the world itself was listening. The journalist broke the silence first. You said your unified field work revealed a structure connecting matter, energy, and consciousness. But what exactly did you find? Einstein leaned back, resting his fingers together as he gazed upward, lost for a moment in thought. When I first began searching for the unified field, he said, I believed it would be a purely physical discovery, a single equation to unite gravity and electromagnetism, a thread tying together the fabric of space-time. But the further I went, the more I began to sense that the missing element was not physical at all. He paused, then looked straight at the journalist. It was mind. Mind? The journalist asked, brows furrowed. Yes, Einstein said softly. Not the brain, not thought, but awareness. The silent witness behind all perception. The thread that runs beneath particles and beyond stars. He leaned forward, voice firm now. At the beginning of the 20th century, we thought the atom was solid, the fundamental unit of reality. But it isn't. At its heart lies emptiness, vast and ungraspable. And yet that emptiness hums. You mean the quantum vacuum? The journalist asked. Yes, but more than that, Einstein implied. Beneath the vacuum there's a rhythm, not mechanical, not measurable, a living, breathing pulse. Some might call it the breath of God. I call it the field behind the field. He stood slowly and walked toward the window. The glass fogged slightly from his breath. You know the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, he said without turning. Two particles, once connected, remain entangled even across galaxies. They respond instantly, as if space is irrelevant. That phenomenon, it isn't just about particles. It's a signpost. It whispers that everything is already connected. The journalist nodded slowly. So, if particles can remain linked across distance, he ventured, you believe consciousnesses can remain connected, even across death? Einstein turned to face him, his eyes sharp now. Connection is the foundation of reality. Not separation, not isolation. Connection, that is the thread of the universe. And death does not cut that thread, it reveals it. But Professor, the journalist said carefully, doesn't this upend everything modern physics is built upon? Einstein smiled with a touch of sadness. It doesn't destroy physics, it completes it. The problem is not that science is wrong, it is that it's incomplete. Physics is like a symphony, missing its final movement. The notes are all there, but the melody stops before the truth. He walked slowly back to his chair and sat down again, voice quieter now. Science can map matter. It can measure force, velocity, decay, but it cannot yet touch the observer. And the observer changes everything. Until we account for the one who watches, we are like men trying to measure the sea while ignoring the tide. The journalist scribbled, his mind spinning faster than his pen could follow. And you believe this consciousness, this unified field, it survives death? Einstein nodded. I do not believe it. I know it. I see its traces in mathematics. I hear its echoes in the harmonics of quantum mechanics. And I feel its weight in the silence between thoughts. He reached into the drawer beside his chair and pulled out a folded paper. He unfolded it slowly. It was a hand-drawn sketch, something between a circuit diagram and a mandala. Lines, spirals, equations. At the center, a point labeled S. This, Einstein said, is what I never published. A personal model. Incomplete, yes, but it describes what I suspect, that space, time, and consciousness form a triad. A triangle of being. The observer at the top, shaping the lines below. The journalist stared at the drawing, breath caught in his chest. Then death, he whispered, is not the collapse of the system. No, Einstein said, it is the reset, the retreat from one corner of the triangle back to the point of origin. Consciousness does not vanish, it reconfigures. He looked at the fireplace, now glowing faintly red. Matter is dense thought. Energy is flowing attention, and consciousness is the space between. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the mantel clock, like time quietly nodding in agreement. Then the journalist asked, almost too softly to be heard, "So if this is true, why stay silent for so long?" Einstein didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was nearly a whisper. Because the world fears what it cannot measure. And I fear that if I spoke too soon, these ideas would be twisted, turned into dogma, turned into power, and used against the very awakening they are meant to bring. He looked into the journalist's eyes with quiet gravity. But I also fear silence, for it is in silence that ignorance grows loudest. Art 3. Consciousness shapes reality, the observer, quantum paradox, and the nature of God. The journalist sat frozen, overwhelmed by the ideas Einstein had just laid before him, of a universe built not merely of particles and forces, but of awareness, of patterns shaped by perception, of life not ending in death, but folding back into something more fundamental. Finally, he found the courage to ask the question most would have avoided. Then, Professor, if all of this is true, if consciousness is primary and shapes the very fabric of reality, what does that make God? Einstein didn't flinch. He didn't scoff, as many would expect from a man of science. Instead, his expression softened, as though the word God was not something foreign to him, but a presence he had long kept close in silence. He lifted his hand and pointed not upward, but inward. God, he said quietly, is not a person, not an old man on a throne, not some celestial judge. That is mythology, symbols created by frightened minds to contain what cannot be contained. He paused, then continued. God is not in the universe. God is the universe, or rather, the conscious field from which the universe emerges. A vast ocean of awareness in which all waves, yours, mine, every life form, rise, dance, and fall. The journalist felt a chill down his spine. The fireplace crackled faintly behind them, but the room itself seemed to still. So, he whispered, we are not separate from God. Einstein's voice was calm. We are God, forgetting. We are drops of the same ocean, momentarily shaped into forms. The tragedy is not death. It's the illusion that we were ever apart. He stood again, slower this time. His hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but as if channeling something weightier than thought. Every mystic throughout history has said this in their own language, he continued. But I arrived at it through mathematics, through paradox. What paradox? The journalist asked. Einstein walked to his bookshelf and pulled out a thin journal. Flipping to a bookmarked page, he laid it on the table, revealing a diagram of the famous double-slit experiment. This, he said, this simple test changed everything. A particle behaves differently when it is observed. Light passes through two slits and creates an interference pattern. Unless you watch it, then it behaves like a particle, as if it knows it's being watched. He looked up. How does a photon know? It has no brain, no eyes, and yet the act of observation changes its behavior. What does that mean? The journalist asked. Einstein tapped the paper. It means reality is not independent, it is relational. What is real is not a fixed object, but a dance between observer and observed. The universe is not a machine, it is a mirror. The journalist's mind reeled. The laws of physics he had always believed were cold, objective, impersonal. But now they were being rewritten, re-understood as deeply intimate. Consciousness wasn't just in the equation, it was the equation. So, are you saying, he hesitated, that consciousness creates the universe? Einstein considered that for a moment, then replied, not creates, shapes, co-authors. The universe is not a finished book. It is a manuscript in progress, written in collaboration between matter, energy, and awareness. Without consciousness, there is no experience. Without experience, there is no meaning. And meaning is what gives reality its shape. He returned to his chair slowly this time, as if each movement carried both his body and the weight of his discoveries. And after death? The journalist asked. What happens then, if all this is true? Einstein closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Eyes not tired, but tranquil. After death, we return to the field of pure awareness. No longer bound by form, or identity, or time. We do not disappear. We dissolve. Like a melody that fades, but whose notes remain forever etched in the silence. He added, almost wistfully, that is why no one who has ever lived is truly gone. Their consciousness remains, woven into the fabric of the whole. And those who lived with cruelty, the journalist asked, quietly, do they return too? Einstein didn't hesitate. All return, but not to the same layer. You see, the field is not uniform. It has levels, vibrations. Those who lived for self, for power, remain near the surface, close to the noise of their unfinished stories. But those who loved, who sought truth, who gave more than they took, they rise. They merge with something higher. He folded his hands. The soul does not vanish. It evolves. And evolution continues until consciousness remembers its origin, until it chooses not to return. That is what ancient traditions called liberation. The journalist was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, almost to himself, and in that moment, when consciousness merges with the whole, does it lose itself? Einstein smiled gently. No, it becomes more itself than it has ever been. Like a river meeting the ocean, it does not cease to exist. It finds its full identity, not as a drop, but as the sea. Part 4. The immortal field, rebirth, suffering, and the purpose of pain. The silence between the two men now felt heavier than words. The journalist had stopped taking notes. His pen rested limp in his hand, forgotten. He sat motionless, heart beating slowly, aware that he was no longer merely documenting a conversation, but witnessing a revelation. Einstein spoke next, voice calm, as if they were merely returning to a long-forgotten topic. You ask what happens after death. I have given you the mathematical hints, but I sense you also want something else, something theorems cannot provide. You want to know, why does it matter? Why live as if consciousness endures? The journalist nodded slowly. Einstein continued, because if we are eternal, then every moment matters. Every thought, every choice, every suffering, none of it is lost. If consciousness returns, then life is not a single performance, but a symphony of movements, a dance of becoming. He leaned back, hands folded. I suspect the cycle does not end with one life. Consciousness returns, again and again, not by force, but by resonance. It is drawn to the unfinished, to the unlearned, to the unloved. The journalist leaned forward. Are you speaking of reincarnation? Einstein gave a thoughtful pause. Yes, though I dislike the word. It carries too much cultural weight, too many superstitions. But the essence is true. Consciousness, like energy, cannot be destroyed, only transformed. It returns, not randomly, but purposefully. Purposefully? The journalist asked. To do what? Einstein replied without hesitation. To grow, to remember, to love more deeply each time, until it remembers fully what it is. The wind outside had picked up again, whispering through the cracks in the old study windows. But if that is true, the journalist asked slowly, then why suffering? Why is this world so filled with pain? Einstein was quiet for a long moment, because suffering is not punishment, it is pressure, necessary for growth. Just as muscle must strain to become strong, the soul must stretch through loss, confusion, failure. These are not signs of abandonment, they are signs of potential. He looked directly at the journalist. Even the most broken life contains the blueprint of light. No experience is wasted. The universe keeps no trash. The journalist exhaled, visibly shaken. He recalled the death of his brother, the long nights of grief, the ache that never fully left his chest. But some lives, he whispered, some lives seem only full of tragedy. Some people die alone, forgotten. How can that be part of any plan? Einstein's gaze softened. It is not always visible from here, but when we return to the field, when we stand beyond the veil, there is understanding. Even the most painful life leaves ripples in the whole. It affects others, it shifts the path. In the immortal field, no suffering is meaningless. He added, his voice lower. What we call tragedy may, from a higher vantage, be initiation. The fire had nearly burned out now. Only a few glowing embers remained. So you're saying, the journalist asked, that suffering is the school of the soul? Einstein nodded. Exactly. Each life is a lesson. Some are harsh, some are short, but all are invitations to awaken. And when does the cycle end? The journalist asked. When the consciousness no longer needs form, Einstein answered. When it has nothing left to grasp, no illusion to defend, no fear to run from, then it simply chooses stillness. It merges. What the mystics called moksha, nirvana, or liberation. The journalist sat back. He was no longer sure whether he was in a room or a dream. And what remains then? He asked. Einstein smiled faintly. Not nothingness, wholeness. Consciousness does not dissolve, it becomes indivisible, still radiant, still aware, but no longer separate, no longer seeking, just being. Is that heaven? Heaven is a metaphor. The real thing is quieter. It's peace, the kind you cannot imagine until everything you thought you were is gone. There was a moment of stillness, and then the old clock in the room began to chime. Midnight, 12 slow, echoing strikes. The journalist noted later how they felt symbolic, as though something unseen had just been confirmed. What you are describing, he said quietly, changes everything. Einstein nodded slowly. Yes, and that is why it must be revealed carefully. For the same reason, electricity was not handed to the first man who built fire. Because knowledge without maturity becomes danger. He stood, unsteady for a moment, and steadied himself against the table. But I sense a new maturity coming. Materialism has reached its limits. Science and spirit are no longer enemies. They are two eyes of the same vision. "So this is why you speak now?" the journalist asked. "Yes," Einstein said, "because time is running out, not just for me, but for humanity. We must remember who we are, or we may not survive what we are becoming." He looked into the younger man's eyes. "We are not machines, not mistakes. We are echoes of eternity, and we have forgotten." Part 5, the final threshold. Liberation, unity, and the choice beyond death. The room had grown darker, but neither of them moved to light another lamp. The fading glow from the fireplace and the occasional moan of wind outside seemed fitting now. A soft reminder that time was passing and not much of it remained. The journalist sat with his hands folded tightly, aware that he was not just speaking to a man at the end of his life, but to a threshold itself. Einstein, for all his scientific acclaim, now felt more like a monk than a physicist, not in robes, but in wisdom. "You mentioned liberation," the journalist said quietly. "What is it really? Is it the end of the soul?" Einstein smiled, not with amusement, but with recognition. "No. Liberation is not the end of the soul. It is the end of seeking, the end of illusion. When consciousness no longer clings to form, to memory, to self, when it sees through the theater of identity, it becomes what it always was." He paused, then added, "And yet individuality is not lost. Just as the ocean contains waves without dividing itself, the whole can hold each soul's essence without separation." The journalist leaned in. "So death is not a wall, but a door?" Einstein nodded. "Yes, but here's the greater truth. The door is not locked. It opens from within. At every stage, the soul has a choice, whether to return, to learn more, or to rest. Some call it reincarnation, others call it the wheel. But the deeper truth is this: freedom is built into the design. We are not forced to be here?" the journalist asked. "No," Einstein said. "We choose, again and again, until we no longer need to. And when that moment comes, then," Einstein said softly, "we become what the mystics called light. Not metaphorical light, consciousness without weight, without veil. A return not to nothing, but to everything." There was silence again. The journalist finally asked, "And what about those who lived selfishly, who caused pain? Do they also merge with this light?" Einstein's tone shifted, still calm, but firm. "Eventually, yes, but not immediately. There are layers to reality, like frequencies on a radio. Those who clung to fear, greed, cruelty, they remain in denser vibrations. Their consciousness continues, but in shadows of their own making." He added, "This is not punishment, it is resonance. We awaken at the level we vibrate. Those who lived for the self must face the echo of their own choices until they begin to remember. Even they are not lost. No one is." The journalist's voice trembled. "Then what is the highest law, if not judgment?" Einstein's eyes were steady. "Free will. That is the highest law. Even God does not override it. We are not controlled. We are invited, and love is the invitation." The clock struck once. 1 o'clock in the morning. Outside, the wind had stopped. A silence now rested over the house, so complete, it felt sacred. Einstein spoke again, slower this time. "In the end, there is only one truth that matters. Love is the only reality that does not vanish. It is not an emotion. It is the force that binds all things. Those who lived with love carry light with them, and those who suffered without understanding will one day see even their pain was held, never abandoned." He looked down for a moment, then added with a fragile smile, "That is why I speak now, because I fear we have forgotten that." "Forgotten what?" the journalist asked. Einstein raised his head. "That we are not enemies, not strangers. We are reflections of one another. This world teaches division, but division is a lie. We do not need to be the same to be one." He stood slowly, unsteady but upright. "If humanity does not remember its unity, it may not survive the coming century. Technology has outpaced morality, knowledge has outpaced wisdom, And so I say this, not as a scientist, but as a soul. The future will not be built with data alone. It must be built with remembrance. The journalist could feel his throat tighten. It was as if the words spoken in this room were not only for him, but for generations yet unborn. "And your final message, Professor?" he asked, voice low. Einstein's eyes glinted in the dying firelight. "Live not in fear. Live in search. Seek not control, but understanding. Seek not comfort, but truth. And when the truth is found, do not weaponize it. Share it, gently, quietly, for those ready to hear." He walked slowly to the window and looked out. The sky had begun to lighten, the first strokes of dawn brushing the horizon. "In my youth," Einstein said, almost to himself, "I thought the greatest task was to understand the universe, to find the formula that explained everything. But now, I know better." He turned back to the journalist. "The hardest task is not to understand the universe. It is to understand the self. To understand how to love without fear, how to let go without regret, how to see the divine in those we dislike." A soft pause. Then a whisper. "That is awakening." He extended his hand. The journalist rose and took it. Their handshake was quiet, human, and final. "Protect the light," Einstein said, "even when it's small, especially then." And with that, he turned back to the window, watching the new day begin. Part 6, the last page. Memory, meaning, and the whisper that remains. The journalist stepped outside, just as the first light broke across the sky. He didn't rush. He didn't even breathe deeply. He simply stood there for a moment, still, silent, while the world changed around him. Behind him, the door closed with a soft wooden thud. Ahead of him, the path through the garden glistened with dew. It was a morning like any other, and yet, something had shifted. Not in the sky, not in the world, but in him. He walked slowly down the stone path, where the first spring leaves were just beginning to uncurl. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, as if sensing that something sacred had just happened indoors. In his notebook he wrote only one line: "It does not matter what awaits us later. What matters is what we do now." And he never opened that notebook again. What Einstein shared that night would never appear in a scientific journal. There would be no citations, no institutional recognition, no debates in lecture halls. But perhaps that was the point. Some truths do not shout, they whisper, and they wait for those who are still enough to hear them. Years passed, then decades. The world spun forward as it always does. Wars came and went. Technologies rose. Voices of division grew louder. The veil of materialism thickened. But beneath it all, beneath the noise, those few pages remained, locked away in a forgotten drawer, waiting. And then one day, long after Einstein's body had returned to the earth, the manuscript was found. A cracked leather folder, yellowed paper, faded ink. But the words were alive. Some dismissed it as myth, others as forgery. The tone was too poetic, they said. The content too spiritual for a scientist. But a few, those who had also stared into the edge of death, or sat silently in the wake of suffering, recognized something else. Pattern, resonance, truth. It wasn't proof, it was a seed. That final interview had not solved the mystery of death. It had only shifted the question. From what happens after, to how will you live before? In one of Einstein's private margins, a note scribbled in his handwriting read, "The equation is incomplete without love." He never published that either, but perhaps he didn't need to. Some truths are not meant to be argued, they are meant to be lived. If you are reading or hearing this now, it means the whisper reached you. Through decades of silence, through the static of skepticism, through the noise of a world that has forgotten stillness. The question is no longer whether the soul continues, it's whether you will. Whether you will continue to awaken, to remember, to choose awareness over fear, unity over division, compassion over control. Because death is not the final test, life is. And as Einstein once said, live not in fear, Live in search. That is all that matters.